This video is brought to you by Squarespace. We've all thought of doing this. What would Donkey Kong Bonanza's world look like if you were to smash literally everything that you can smash? How long would it take? And would it be worth it? Well, today, I wanted to let the intrusive thoughts take over. This is the smallest area in the game. How long could it possibly take? I mean, DK's quick and nimble, and one hell of a guy too. Would you believe me if I said it took almost an hour just to clear out this first hallway? Not the whole tutorial, just the hallway. Yeah, this took way longer than I thought it was going to. And it wasn't for the reasons that you'd expect. The challenging culprit here is the walls. The unbreakable portions aren't just flat and easy to knock off. There's tons of crevices and corners, and the stone I was trying to clear out kept getting stuck. These spots were so small that DK couldn't just punch them. His hitbox was simply too big. So the only solution here was to throw rocks at these tiny spots until they eventually broke free. What was also difficult was breaking the stones near the ceiling. My goal was to smash from top to bottom, because I didn't want to have to keep climbing up whenever I'd fall, but it didn't really go as planned. What this led to was creating two different pathways in the air, which was confusing, and I also had to worry about these chunks that don't fall. They float in the air until they're destroyed. By the end, I had a lot of teeny tiny chunks floating in the middle and had no choice but to constantly throw rocks at them. Once the hallway was done, I started chipping away at everything else in the next room, and that includes this conveyor belt of dirt. It took me a few minutes to realize that it was impossible to get rid of. It would always respawn no matter what you did. There's a handful of terrain that infinitely respawns in all the layers, so if you see any left over when we've cleared out a level, that's why. After another 30 minutes or so, I finally cleared out this area. There might still be a few teeny tiny particles of dirt stuck in the ceiling, but it was getting to the point where I was running out of rocks to throw. This was about as close as I was gonna get, and it honestly looked really cool anyway. It was like I transformed the space into a sprawling cave filled with stalagmites. I mean, it was kind of that before, but now it's more cavey! And after that, I finally got the first banana! Oh, it only took me, what, 2.5 hours? And they said the Cuphead tutorial was hard. The section with the banana was pretty easy. Clearing out the chunks stuck in the wall or ceiling took less time simply because the space itself was much smaller. I eventually got myself to the bottom and honestly forgot that there was this entire room to do still. But thankfully, most of the ceiling didn't have dirt, which was a huge relief. Once this room was done, I made my way to the next one and it had another conveyor belt of dirt. I already knew that I wasn't going to be able to clear that stuff out of the way, so I made my way around and started smashing up the sides. After just a few minutes though, I realized that the ceiling was much taller than I anticipated. I climbed up this pile of dirt and oh my god, look at how big this hidden area is. There's even a monkey up here that says he was hiding, so I guess I was going to be smashing way more than anticipated. I figured the best way to do this was to go from top to bottom, because these walls for whatever reason aren't climbable. As I made my way through all the layers, I discovered that there was a wall on one side to prevent me from falling. I also noticed that the monkey was on the other side of the wall, so of course, I had to do this. I have no idea if this was intentional or not, but that is pretty hilarious. This has massive throw the penguin off the cliff energy from Mario 64. Except, whoa, hold on, he's back? Okay, maybe he has a secret jet barrel like Diddy Kong? Either way, the fact that I can send him into a death pit is still funny. But alas, after almost an hour, I managed to clear out all this crap and could finally move on to the last segment, the gold room. But real quick, just look at how different this area is. Having the rocks gone makes this room look way more open and pretty. The gold room is a really fun area because the gold breaks much more easily than rock. However, I got pretty overwhelmed when I noticed that the room was massive and the entire ceiling was covered in rock. Dude, it takes so long to throw rocks at other rocks before they break. I'm not mentally prepared for this. But thankfully, the gold managed to save the day. And that's because it explodes when you throw it. Why does it explode? I don't know, but it saved me a ton of time. And not only that, throwing it next to these bananas also allowed me to break all this gold surrounding the bananas. I wasn't initially sure if throwing the gold would count as a banana hit, but it apparently doesn't. So I was able to use the gold's explosive power to completely clear out the area. Once that was done, my focus was on chipping away at the rock on the walls, as well as throwing gold at the ceiling. This took forever, but again, I'm just grateful that the gold had an actual blast radius that would clean out the crevices surrounding it. After almost 2 more hours, I threw my last piece of gold and was actually done. And yeah, this one tutorial level took me almost 7 hours total, and that's when I realized that I needed help. There's just no way I'm gonna be able to do all these layers, so I asked a few friends to see if any of them would be interested in helping. Game Champ said, "Sounds fun." And D-Pad was willing to help with some of the layers. As we get to different areas, you'll hear me or D-Pad talk about the ones that we cleared out. I looked around the map, and honestly, this didn't look all that bad. A good chunk of this area is metal, so I quickly shot up to the top and switched to the elephant transformation. I have been waiting for hours to use this, and it felt so good to not have to smash everything manually. Just watching the pieces evaporate in front of me was ecstatic. And even better is that I can play as the elephant literally the entire time. Most of the terrain spawns treasure chests every few seconds, and a lot of these chests have gold. Gold is what's used to refill the banana meter, which means that I'll have a full meter by just doing what I'm doing. There's only a few types of terrain that don't spawn the treasure chests, and they also aren't very common materials. So what this led to was just trying to stay near the top as often as possible and ensuring that I was sucking up every last morsel. And while it felt great to do this, it was also pretty mind-numbing. I went from playing Donkey Kong Bananza to Vacuum Cleaner Simulator. So I fired up some podcasts and just tried to stay as focused as possible. And the elephant was not perfect. Sometimes the rock was stubborn and would still get stuck to the sides. To combat this, I would switch to the ostrich, jump into the air, and punch while floating. I usually had to do this jump a few times before getting everything, but it was surprisingly effective. The only thing that was a bit troublesome was the rocks in the water. I wasn't able to suck these out, and I could only punch to the ground so much. So unfortunately, I had to leave a lot of the rock there simply because it wasn't possible to break. I personally wouldn't count this as required terrain to smash anyway because you can't stand on it, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. While I was going through, I nabbed a few bananas along the way. I was getting so much money too that I could very easily fill up this golden cactus thing. I somehow had over 60k gold, but I imagine I might max out my cash by the time I'm done doing all this. I also needed to bomb these spikes, and that had another banana. And at this point, I had conquered pretty much everything. The level honestly didn't look that different to me. Obviously, it looked bigger because all the materials were gone, but the colors were so similar that it's kind of hard to tell. The only thing that was left to do was to go into this cave that was really out of the way. I had to use the snake and ostrich just to get in there. But once all that stuff was smashed up, I was completely done and we can move on to the next sublayer.
Hey, D-Pad Gamer here. So, Sublayer 100, aka the Lagoon Layer, has 3 distinct parts. SL100 has by far the most destructible terrain of the 3. For some very small, shallow bits of water, destroying the surrounding terrain will make the water disappear. Meanwhile, bigger bodies of water are always enclosed within walls of green metal. Something I noticed is that as you destroy terrain, some of the key spots like tuning forks, getaways, challenge entrances, all remain in place, often given a floating ring of metal to sit on. If you teleport to some of these spots, the game actually has a failsafe to keep you from falling immediately. This takes the form of a small, circular platform of pure gold. While this means you could technically keep respawning gold, it's nowhere near as lucrative as just demolishing the terrain. Also, it becomes increasingly apparent that the game does not expect you to destroy all of the breakable terrain. Objects and characters popping in is way more pronounced once the terrain is gone, and in camera mode, certain parts of the metal terrain would actually fade in and out just by adjusting the camera zoom. Both SL101 and SL102 went very quickly, only having a relatively thin layer of rock and dirt atop flat metal platforms. During your average playthrough, Sublayer 101 fills up with water, raising a bridge and platforms, which cannot be undone. So while I couldn't destroy anything down there, there were no collectibles that remained on that terrain. Even the trees actually float up, so they weren't safe from my Kong punches. The Fisher Kongs were also fairly vocal about not being able to fish after I demolished their boats. Next, the hilltop layer is one big flat Neptunite disk with a few protrusions of the dark material. This one, with the hole leading to sublayer 300, vaguely looks like a GameCube. I cut through the land splitting into roughly 4 quarters. I then tried and failed to destroy the terrain in a measured, consistent pattern, instead opting to just doing different stuff, like standing in one spot and spinning around with the Elephant Bananza's vacuum ability, creating a donut-shaped moat. I cleared away far too much with Kong Bananza's long-reaching charge attacks, and so on. It left me with a lot of errant fragments just floating around. Tossing chunks to break those helped, but I learned a valuable lesson. If you're going to destroy the entire world, do it carefully. Once all that was done, I was left with an odd sight. Many of the less important NPCs that usually stand on dirt, rock, or grass would spawn in place as I approached, then fall to the flat Neptunite platform. The object pop-in gave me some real Sonic Frontier vibes. A lot of it looked like a developer's test level, random objects and NPCs just sitting around in a void.
The canyon layer was my very first big level to tackle, and my god. It may not look like it'd take that long, but these are thick layers. Not only are there 3 different areas within this one sublayer, but most of them had tons of rock and dirt to sift through. As usual, I used the elephant to suck everything up. Although I found out later that platforms like the spinning one would respawn no matter what you did, but that didn't matter when about 95% of the walkable land could be smashed up. But man, I spent so many hours doing this that I completely forgot that I was even playing a Donkey Kong game. A few hours in, I only finished a couple of these islands, and it just felt like the rock would never end. And on top of that, there was a lot of rock underneath the levels that I had no idea how to reach yet. As for what the island looks like when it's empty, it kinda just looks the same as the rest of them. Except that the canyon had a pretty bad glare, so it was a bit hard to see anything at the very bottom. This game has a lighting setup in which it switches depending on how high or low you are to the ground, which is why it looks kind of off sometimes. I was in this layer for so long that I think I bugged the game out by accident. Whenever you hit a treasure chest from digging, it'll disappear after a bit of time. However, not only were my chests not going away, but they also weren't spewing out treasure anymore. Maybe there was a safeguard to prevent the game from lagging or crashing, or perhaps there's a limit to how many times a treasure chest can be opened in one instance per area. I'm not really sure what happened, but it didn't matter considering I've maxed out my balloons and have over 100,000 gold. So I'm pretty much set on cash for forever. I'm never gonna run out. After spending several hours getting most of the rock, all that was left to do was the stuff that was floating above the death pit. Thankfully, with all my balloons, I could fall pretty much as often as I wanted. Since the rock was so thick, I flew over to it with the ostrich and sucked up as much as I could. But even still, this didn't quite work as there was a lot of rock that was still unreachable. It was at this point that it was time to switch to co-op play. Using Pauline, you're able to use mouse mode and controller with a second controller. What she does is shout phrases, and those can be used to break rock. Something that I learned that was really helpful is that you can absorb materials by pointing your cursor towards it and holding ZR. So what I did was absorb these tiny little gold pieces, and this turned Pauline's words into gold, which are explosive and more powerful. So I was able to continuously absorb gold and plow through the rock until it was finally all gone. The only thing I wanted to try destroying now was this rock under the ground, but for whatever reason, you can't actually touch it, despite it showing up on the map. But alas, I could finally move on to areas 301 and 302, because of course I'm not done with the canyon yet. 301 wasn't quite as bad, and that's just because there was a lot less to suck up. However, I had one more big obstacle. You see all these walls? Well, normally you take a minecart and blow them up with bombs to get fossils and stuff, but since I had to get rid of all this rock, I had to meticulously fly over to these walls and very carefully suck everything up. This was pretty hard to do because the walls are so thin, so you don't have much to stand on. And while there are floors and hidden gold, it only lasts for so long. I found myself running out of gold and burning through balloons because there was nowhere good to stand. I had to use Pauline quite a few times to clear out little chunks that I missed by accident, and this took over an hour to finish. The main thing that I didn't like was that when you'd fall, sometimes the balloon would spawn DK back to the beginning instead of where you were, meaning I'd have to fly all the way back to where I was. But once that was done, 302 was pretty easy. It's just one flat platform, and despite some tough metal to suck up, it didn't take all that long.
Located at sublayer 400 is the Divide, a very small and simple level that asks an important question: ice cream or poison? To help you make the decision are 2 identical stretches of Neptunite covered in either ice and snow, or dirt, wood, and leaves. The forest side wasn't too bad, but clearing away terrain above a bottomless pit meant I went through just so many balloons. Thankfully, they're cheap, but the constant falling and running back definitely took some time. The freezer side of the Divide was surprisingly not very cool. The ice and snow went quickly enough, but the pure ice's increased durability really tested my patience. Pauline was really important with clearing away those last few chunks.
Next up was the freezer layer. This is another pretty big level, but it didn't seem that bad at first. I decided to head to one of the high points to start, and that's when I realized how annoying the ice was going to be. Not only is it slippery, but it's not climbable. Most of the ice is on the walls and ceiling, so I had to be very cautious and try not to fall. A lot of the ice is inside this cave, and this is a deep cave. It really felt like never-ending ice. And then when you get outside, there's ice surrounding all of the edges right here. And look how far down this goes. It literally sinks down into the death zone. You can actually punch all the way to the bottom too, and a balloon will spawn. So what this means is that I'm gonna have to suck up this ice and be careful to not burn through all my balloons. But I decided to take a break from that and go back into the cave. I made it into this other room and there's pillars all over the place. This isn't that big of a deal, but it meant that I had to use Pauline for a lot of the ice on the ceiling as it was completely unreachable otherwise. Once that was taken care of, there wasn't much left to tackle. It took a long time considering how awkward the ice spots are, but I've managed to get it all. I eventually moved on to 501, and this layer was a lot simpler. There wasn't as much ice to worry about on the walls, it was mostly just sucking up the usual dirt and rocks. Although this was my first time taking care of the lava. The two main components about lava is that it makes you move slower for some reason, and it doesn't produce any gold. Since I was also next to a bunch of rocks, I tried going back and forth to ensure that I'd keep getting gold refills. Outside of some ice and tricky spots, 501 was pretty easy to finish. 502 was kind of the same thing, but there was way more lava. But again, it just required a lot of patience to clean up everything. And 503 was the easiest of them all. We got some dirt on the outside ring, and that's about it. So after several hours of time, Sublayer 500 was finally done.
The forest, of course, has a lot of poison. This wouldn't have bothered me much if it wasn't for the fact that just about every tree and island sticking up out of the poison has no underlying neptunite, bedrock, or anything. One moment I'm smashing through wood and the next I have a lung full of toxic water. Locating the fossils to purchase and upgrade the poison resist pants helped, as did a switch up of strats instead of using the elephant's vacuum on low-lying terrain which leaves behind stubborn bits of wood just above the poison surface. I started really utilizing the snake Bananza. Its unlockable meteor punch ability, where you charge up, then hold B to dive punch downwards, clears a large flat circle of terrain. With this, I could clear layers of terrain down to the poison, then bounce and roll back to safety. Still, I did die and respawn a lot. That probably wasn't helped by the fact that I just started swimming in the poison, letting my health tick down and get reset with cans of apple juice. That said, another issue with the forest, especially in sublayer 601, was the spiky red vines all over the place. They could not be punched through, so I either had to vacuum them up, or throw stuff, or often use Pauline for the really hard to reach bits. Unfortunately, the tallest red vine stretches up above this sublayer's invisible ceiling, meaning I literally could not destroy it. Also, the green rubber blocks could not be destroyed nor climbed, which made navigation a bit tricky in a few spots. Since this area has multiple large floating islands, I got in the habit of using the ostrich to navigate to the landmass's lower point, then Kong Bananza to clear away a large flat expanse that the elephant could safely and efficiently vacuum atop. Once everything above was handled, I would then clear the lower bits pretty quick. I still fell quite often and had to fly or teleport back, but this more methodical approach helped a lot. Also, I should note that the game is odd about whether or not the map renders the indestructible metal platforms that you can find all throughout the game. I would glance at the map, notice loads of weirdly damaged bits of wood, then go back into the game just to realize that they were all trapped within those platforms of various shapes and sizes. Along with this, the indestructible platforms were often set to fade away sooner than the terrain, so at just the right distance you could see the impossible to destroy terrain that was otherwise hidden. Down in 602, I didn't encounter any new challenges, though the vine-wrapped tree that extends up into the ceiling was impossible to clear past a certain point. That's fine though, because clearing away the lowest level left me with a large expanse of bounce pads. It was quite the reward, feeling like this game's version of a trampoline park.
But real quick, a word from our sponsor, Squarespace. This is the best and most powerful place to create the slickest websites. New to Squarespace is the Fluid Engine, a next-generation design system that makes it even easier to make a website. There's also Squarespace extensions that connect your store to vetted third-party tools to extend functionality, and the analytics page makes it easy to see who's visiting your site and where people are coming from. I've updated my site this year and added a small blogging section where I'll write a bit about any specific game I've played. This month, I've written about Clubhouse games. So with that, go to squarespace.com/Nathaniel to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The link is in the description.
After that is the junction, down at sublayer 700. which is the inverse of the divide, bringing two themed paths back into one. While the pure ice was still annoying, both paths here have a lower platform that made the excavation process much quicker. Aside from that, the only other noteworthy thing about this level is the bridge over to the platform in front of the sinkhole. The whole point of visiting the two prior layers was to build this crystalline stone bridge, so destroying it was funny in a kind of strange way.
This was one of the shortest levels to do, and also one of the strangest ones. To start, there's a ton of islands all over the place, and none of them have a skeleton, which meant that after sucking one up, I'd have to teleport back into the sky and jump for another one. I must have teleported like 30 times or something. There's more islands in the sky than there are in Tears of the Kingdom. But and once all those were done, I had to do a ton of smashing into the ground. Since the floor is only water, it's impossible for me to properly clear out all the terrain. What I did as a substitute was smash the sand in until the water covered it. So while it wasn't a perfect solution, at least by the end, it still looked like I was in a giant glass globe. And it looked kinda cool. It was almost like I was experiencing high tide on some random island out in the middle of nowhere. And now we're back to a big sublayer. Tempest is absolutely massive and extremely thick. While 900 is essentially just a big oval, I spent quite a few hours going around it and slowly lowering the layer. On top of that, there was a ton of rocks stuck on the walls that was a pain to suck up. But at this point, I've kind of mastered the art of breaking wall rocks. It takes a combination of using Pauline, the elephant, and sometimes just regular DK. The inside of the temple had a lot of grooves to go around, but overall, it wasn't that bad. It just took an extremely long time to get through. But I wasn't done yet, because now we've got 901. While this room is significantly smaller, my biggest obstacle is all this lava on the ceiling. There was no way to reach it as DK, so I had no choice but to spam Pauline shouts to clear it all out. And interestingly, the lava drips don't even come from the lava, they're coated into the ceiling itself. It's not that it matters because I was wearing an outfit that makes me immune to getting hurt by the lava, but I thought it looked weird to see the dripping when the ceiling was starting to get cleared. This made 901 particularly annoying as I had to keep going around the edges of the walls and tried to find new spots in which Pauline could reach the lava. But when that was finally done, I moved on to 903. I was gonna do 902 next, but I wanted to knock out a quick area first. The only real thing I had to worry about was getting rid of the statues, as that'd be a lot harder to reach if they weren't the main focus. Tempest in general had a ton of statues, and they all had to take priority first. As for the rest of 903, I was mostly just going in this huge circle, sucking away at all the lava. And I don't know what it was, but something about this circle felt like it was never going to end. It was way bigger than it looked, and it took about an hour or so to finish. Then we've got 902. This area was one of the more complex ones. I started by focusing on this big dome that had glass shards surrounded by a skeleton. Unfortunately, the elephant did not work that well as I kept falling off for some reason, so I had to use a lot of regular DK to get the smaller chunks. On the other side was a big cave, and this had a ton of rocks on the walls. This also took quite a long time to get through. I'm just glad that the elephant head was mostly a skeleton and had a thin layer of rocks surrounding it. After that though were a ton of smaller islands. The only real obstacle here is that lightning strikes at you every 10 to 15 seconds. While I had to constantly roll out of the way and avoid getting zapped, this actually kind of sped up my progress a tiny bit. Each time the lightning struck the ground, it would also zap away the rocks near it. I even ended up using the lightning to get some of these hard to reach rocks on the sides quite a few times. So after a few more hours, I cleared out as much rock as I could and was completely done.
Now, when I first dived into sublayer 1000, aka the pit, I was excited. This whole layer is just stone and dirt with little to no indestructible framework to get in the way. This should be quick and easy, no? No. I tackled this layer chaotically at first before the magnitude of what I was dealing with became apparent. Then I got methodical, then tired and angry and annoyed and so on. I may have recorded some downtime here and there, but based on my footage, I spent about 16.5 hours on just this one layer. For context, my entire playthrough, without jumping, that is, only took 17 hours, so There's a lot to cover, but I'll keep it brief. The terrain of sublayer 600 and 601 are contained within mostly smooth bedrock containers. 600 is like a weirdly shaped trash can, and 601 is a big rounded cube. Both are filled with stone, mud, and dirt, and numerous little bits of open space where certain objects and characters are waiting to be uncovered. This means it was very easy to clear large swaths of land, but sometimes I would accidentally clear away the roof of a cave and now have an annoyingly long fall to contend with. A lot of time was wasted having to teleport or climb back up. Still, I made progress, and after clearing away all of the walls, I was able to start sectioning off chunks of terrain, and I turned them into more manageable goals. The snake's meteor punch once again helped, as the smooth rounded walls it would leave behind helps with navigation and efficiency. It's way easier to vacuum a wall up when you have another solid wall to hang on to. Something I noticed, which is especially obvious once falling through the emptied level, is the various pockets of fog that persist independent of the breakable terrain. This is a result of the game kind of pre-baking, if that's the right term, its camera and lighting effects. This isn't a knock against the game, but it did make navigation difficult at times, as even when there was open space and seemingly light above, there were spots where you just couldn't see anything. By the very end, when I had finally cleared away the last of 601, I felt conflicted. I was both excited to move on to something else and hesitant to let go of such a weird area. I'm never going to be able to fall through this unfilled landfill again, or chunk surf across its smooth stone floors. But that's fine, because ultimately, leaving means I won't have to deal with those annoying peekaboo-poid enemies ever again. Good riddance.
Here we have one of the more unique layers, and also the smallest outside of the tutorial. I wasn't really expecting the racer layer to be that hard, and I started off by breaking the gold around the trophy. While this wasn't much of a hurdle per se, I couldn't just blast through it because of the way the gold breaks in DK Bananza. The breakage is very unpredictable with gold. It shatters instantaneously like it's glass, and it was really easy to miss tiny chunks of it as well. With some patience, I broke it all off and also collected the dirt underneath it. Once that was done, I started focusing on the islands. There's a few located here, and none of them have skeletons, so I had to be very careful on how I was cleaning up the rocks. I basically had to get down to one tiny bit and then jump up and suck to finish it, as there wouldn't be a way to return here. There was also this island very close to the starting area, and I honestly wasn't sure how to reach it. So I used dirt stacking to get up top, but I think there was probably an easier way to get up there, like with a cannon or something, because there was an NPC chillin' just waiting for me. The racetrack itself was shockingly easy. It was mostly just light mud, so despite its large size, it was also one thin layer. It was a nice change of pace, I'm not gonna lie. So after a couple hours, the racing layer was completely done, and it doesn't even look all that different. At least when you're on the racing track, because the skeleton so closely follows it. Moving right along to the next layer, this one has 5 areas to go through. 1200 is pretty quick. There's nothing crazy to do here. Not even the walls took that long to clear out. 1201 was a pretty fun one, and I wanted to try something out. I was wondering if it was possible to do the zipline part without using the zipline, so I tried it out with Ostrich, and I somehow pulled it off on the first try. It was scary to do, but wasn't really all that hard. 1202 was also pretty simple. There were a couple of floating islands, but I got to them with the snake and the rest is a breeze. It's kind of funny how the more of this that I play, the faster it feels. I'm still spending the same 3 to 6 hours per layer, but it just doesn't feel as long anymore. 1203 was a bit different though, seeing as there was a chunk of thin platforms and clouds surrounding them. I basically had to visit all the different chunks, suck up the ground, and move on. There was also a lot of rock on the ceiling, but I used Pauline as well as this moving platform to reach it all. The rest of 1203 was essentially a big circle. I took out all the glass snakes first and worked my way around until everything eventually disappeared. Strangely enough, this is the brightest level that I've seen after getting rid of the terrain. The lighting on a lot of the Bananza levels is very orange and dark, but this one is quite the opposite. 1204 was the final area and was the smallest of the bunch. It barely even looks that different with the glass and snow gone. The skeleton is very closely matched with all the terrain.
The groove layer is a nice and easy level to destroy, as it's pretty small with not a lot of destructible terrain. Aside from some of the lower rooms, I only had a thin layer of stone on the walls and floor to clean up. It made me feel like I was pressure washing the place. There was one issue though, as I offhandedly completed the post-game mission of assisting the groove tones and rebuilding the speaker. This unfortunately regenerated a lot of the layer's terrain. It only wasted about a half hour, but it definitely messed with my groove.
The Feast Layer. Oh my god, the Feast Layer. This is by far the most gargantuan and obnoxiously big area in the entire game. And frankly, it's one of my favorites for its theming. It's a lot of fun to play like a normal person. But for what I'm doing, look how much there is to do here! It's just ridiculous! And it's not even that it was just big, but there was a new terrain type that I wasn't a fan of, the muck. This green phlegm crap can only be destroyed with salt, meaning that there's no way to use the elephant or even DK's punches to get rid of it. While there wasn't a lot of muck in 1400, there was enough of it that I had to be really careful of how much salt I was sucking up. I always had to look around and ensure I got rid of the muck first, or it'd be impossible to get rid of without resetting all the terrain. And oh my god, the walls. The entire layer is surrounded by these absurdly tall walls of meat that I just had to suck up. I'd have to imagine I spent like, what, at least 2 hours on just the walls? You know, I'm kind of wondering which layer took longer. Was it this one or the canyon? Both layers were several hours of time, but the Feast layer also had the muck and way more walls to clean up. Every time I looked at the minimap, it felt like I wasn't making any progress. The scope of the Feast layer was a 4-course meal. I spent a couple hours working on the terrain that I could visibly see, only to realize that I just finished like 10% of the entire map. If I didn't make it clear enough somehow, this layer took forever, but I was able to clear it all up. Even with all the terrain gone, it was still absolutely massive to walk through. It's surprising just how big one of the later levels in the game even are. But I wasn't done yet. I still had to tackle 1401, and this is where I ran into some problems. You know that muck that I wasn't a fan of before? Well, it's everywhere now. And yeah, I mean everywhere. The muck is dripping off the ceiling. It's found in clumps in the walls. You couldn't escape it. I had no choice but to very meticulously throw salt at each and every muck pile. But that's when I ran into a problem. Have you noticed that the muck isn't going away despite throwing all this salt at it? See, this happens with all the terrain in the game when it's stuck in tight corners, but normally you can use a DK punch or the elephant to suck up any pieces that are being stubborn. I don't have that option with the muck, and believe me, I tried everything. I approached the muck at different distances. I used the elephant balls, DK chunks, Pauline shouts, different types of transformations, you name it. There's no clothing in the game to make you immune to muck either. All I could do was take less damage, but I still couldn't attack it with anything but the salt. And while I could clear out some of the muck, a lot of it was just impossible to reach. No matter how many different angles I'd approach it at, if muck was stuck between pipes or trapped in a wedge, it wasn't going away. So I believe this is the first layer where it's actually not possible to smash everything.
The Forbidden Layer has only a single sublayer consisting of a hallway and then multiple relatively small floating islands and platforms and 2 big sections that seem simple. You know, it should be easy, but it was actually one of the more frustrating levels I had to tackle. The reason was, to put it simply, concrete. The majority of this layer's terrain is concrete, which is one of the game's strongest materials. It can only be destroyed with a sturdy chunk as a weapon, Kong Bananza's attacks, explosives, and Snake Bananza's meteor punch. What's worse, this layer's concrete contained little to no gold, and basically no treasure chests, meaning I was constantly running out of Banergy. Like in the forest layer where I relied on regenerative apple juice, I was chugging melon juice nonstop. It also, of course, has the added difficulty of vast expanses of open air, great for wasting balloons. The giant areas created by Securitones on my first visit also made things kinda complicated. Any chunk you toss into these areas leaves behind an arc of blue crystalline passage stone. This applies to chunks you throw, but also chunks you may accidentally dislodge from friendly fractones, and knock back while breaking through concrete. Passage stone is very brittle, so it's quick to clean up, but it got pretty messy at times. All that said, this layer was one of the last ones I tackled, and I utilized all of the strategies I'd come up with along the way. The end result was pretty cool, but I was also very glad to have finally finished my part of this challenge.
And last but not least, we have the planet core. This world has 10 areas, so I already knew this was gonna take quite a long time. Starting at 1600, I went to this island behind me. Following that was the K. Rool statue, and for some reason, my tracker was way off and I had to aim above the statue to collect the rock. I have no idea why this was happening. I'd have to assume it had something to do with the cameras. And that's when I realized that there were a bunch of random islands, so I used the ostrich to reach them, suck up the terrain, and teleport back to the beginning. It was kind of annoying having to do that a bunch of times, but the rest of the ground was spikes, so I didn't have much of a choice. The rest of this area was pretty insignificant. I just sucked up a lot of stone and moved on. 1601 was also a lot of stone, but involved the same strategies as before. 1602 was a bit different, considering it's technically an auto-scroller. There wasn't even that much stuff to suck up. It was just a small handful of bushes and spike balls. I just used the elephant's balls and a bit of sucking to take care of the job. The auto-scrolling didn't even matter, considering I could teleport back to the beginning. 1603 was also pretty basic. There was barely anything to destroy. The real problem, however, was 1604, and that's because surrounding this area was nothing but thorns. And here's the problem with that. There are no outfits that make you immune to them, meaning that they aren't climbable without dying in a few seconds. Sure, you can swap outfits to take less damage to thorns, but I wasn't really going to be able to touch them at all. And just look at how many thorns there are. There's barely any skeleton platforms, and only a couple of them are high in the air. I genuinely had no idea how to tackle this, so I had to do a good bit of experimenting. I started by spamming Pauline's shouts, which, while slow, was a good way to eliminate the thorns high in the air. The problem, however, was just how many thorns were below the platforms that, again, I can't stand on, and I could barely even reach them with Pauline. I was able to use the elephant and get some stuff close by, but that was about it. I tried taking one of the thorn balls and rolling around on the thorns, and while I didn't get hurt this way, I wasn't able to suck up anything either. Now, of course, I could do dirt stacking with Pauline, but I didn't know how that was going to help me reach the thorns underneath me. So I decided to at least go to the other platforms that I could stand on and use as much Pauline shouts as I could. This took forever, but I was able to get rid of a nice chunk of the thorns at least. But then I had an idea. I started jumping off the platforms and aiming down while sucking with the elephant. Because I've maxed out my stats, his reach was far enough to the point that I was able to clear out a nice chunk of thorns each time I did this. That's when I realized that Pauline's dirt stacking actually would be useful. I started to make a nice little line, and then I could jump off the top of that and get a ton of distance to suck up all the thorns in front of me. The only part of this strategy that was kind of obnoxious was the balloon would always spawn me back to the beginning, meaning I'd have to jump back to my dirt pile every single time. But it was actually working. And it was working fast. Whenever I couldn't reach any more thorns, I'd just make the dirt pile go out farther and farther. The dirt managed to get so tall that I was at a point in which I couldn't jump anymore. It was strange. For some reason, I'd roll off the dirt, but I just wasn't allowed to jump. It didn't really matter because I was getting the distance I needed, but I'm assuming that this was happening because my tall dirt pile was touching the skybox in the area, and maybe that was breaking DK's controls a bit. So after about 3 hours, I somehow managed to clear out all of 1604. It took so long, but it was really fun figuring out a strategy to clear out all the terrain. Moving on to 1605, it was a pretty small level. There were 2 different areas, and it wasn't all that complicated to smash them up. 1606 was more or less the same experience. Frankly, all these levels have started to feel the same after doing this for such a long period of time. 1607, however, was a bit of a different story. There was a ton of gold to break that was over a floor of spikes. I was able to throw gold to get rid of most of it, although they were in very limited quantities. That was the least of my worries though, as I was now approached with a long hallway that's filled to the brim with thorns. The majority of these thorns could be sucked up, but some of them needed Pauline shouts. However, the ending had thorns that were so large and so high up that not even Pauline could reach them. Considering that I didn't have much to work with, I had no choice but to make another big dirt stack with Pauline to get more height. This took a significant amount of time, but I didn't have much of a choice. There was absolutely no other way to reach these thorns, and it took a couple hours to clear everything out. Moving on to 1608, it was a little funky since there were some platforms to reach without skeletons. You normally use a minecart to blast them away, but I wanted to try to do this minecartless. And yes, you can reach them all with some ostrich jumps. There was also a ton of gold above more spiky floors, which was pretty annoying to deal with. I tried brute forcing it with DK, but ended up using Pauline because I was tired of dying every 30 seconds. And finally, last but not least, is 1609. And honestly, it was more of the same thing. Blow up the gold over the spikes and suck up the rest. Something I did find interesting is that when you approach the final boss pipe, the camera is forcefully focused on that pipe and nothing else. This made getting the gold behind the camera a little irritating, but if you ran far enough behind it, you'd get control of the camera again. I can't recall any other point in the game where the camera auto-locks onto something, at least when it comes to these worlds themselves. So in conclusion, you can't smash everything in Donkey Kong Bonanza. But I mean, Close enough, right? Outside of the mucky snot in sublayer 1401, everything else can actually be smashed to smithereens. I wouldn't recommend it, but you technically can do it if you have way too much free time. And with that, thanks for watching, and thanks to D-Pad Gamer for helping out with this video.